This is Dr. Mark Hitchcock from Faith Bible Church in Edmond, Oklahoma, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Marking the Times. Thank you so much for joining us for this video blog. I hope you enjoy it and appreciate the information you're receiving. If you do, tell some other folks about it and have them watch it with you or kind of spend time talking with you about it to give you kind of a common area to discuss, what's happening in the end times. What we talk about on Marking the Times are end-time events kind of related to events happening in our world today, but also just answer questions you send in. I want to address a question today. You can send those questions into our Facebook page. This is a question that does have to do with the end times. The writer says this, says, as a person studying the financial markets, the economy plays a huge role in this study. I've been listening to a few economists, and they've said that we're due for another recession soon, and this recession will be worse than the financial crisis we had. That we last had. Long story short, they say that because of the enormous amount of debt we've accumulated and our insanely low interest rates, similar to Europe with their negative interest rates, the next recession will be inflationary, and we'll see rising prices as a result. And with both American central bank and the European central bank, they similarly complain that the biggest problem facing each of our domestic economies is that there's not enough inflation. Of course, we can only wait and see, but I would love if you could potentially shed some light on this topic, and then goes on to talk about American prophecy and so on. This is a great question because we're hearing a lot about recession all of a sudden, and some of this may be politically motivated. It seems like a lot of people who don't like President Trump would like for there to be an inflation, and the more they talk about it, I think they hope it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. But there are warning signs, I think, that are out there that some economists mention. Again, I'm not an economist. I can just go by what others say. But certainly today there are some danger signs on the horizon. We see the debt skyrocketing in America. I just read the other day that our annual deficits now are $1 trillion. And we already are about $22 trillion, but we'll be adding $1 trillion a year. Interest rates are low. In Europe, they're almost negative. So if there is a recession that takes place, there's not a whole lot that these central banks will be able to do to lower interest rates because they're already so low. The economy, the world economy, seems to be getting more resistant to fiscal policy and fiscal stimulus. Then you've got the global trade that's kind of uncertain. So a lot of people see kind of some dark times on the horizon for the economy. And I want to talk about that in light of this question and the third horseman of the apocalypse, the rider on the black horse. Now, just a little bit of background here on this. My view is that the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which are the first four sealed judgments in the book of Revelation, that they're opened in the first half of the tribulation period. So what we're reading here are events that are going to happen during the tribulation period. But what we see in our world today, I think, is a growing setup for what the Bible says is going to happen in the future. So what we're reading here in Revelation 6 is not what's happening now or could happen, next week or next month. It's the first half of the tribulation period. But what we see today is a setup or a foreshadow of that. And it says in Revelation 6 verse 5, and when he broke the third seal, I heard the living creature saying, come, and I looked and behold a black horse. And he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. So this clearly pictures famine, weighing out scales, weighing out food and money. And it's interesting, the previous rider on the previous horse was a rider on a red horse, which is warfare. So there's going to be a lot of wars and rumors of wars breaking out during the tribulation, which will then lead to economic disaster in the world and also to famine. But it says here, and I heard as it were a voice in the center of the four living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine. Now, what this is saying here is that during this time in the future, it's going to take a denarius, which was an average working man's wages for a day. It's going to take a denarius, all you can make in one day, to buy a quart of wheat, which was about what one person needed for food for a day. Or you could take that denarius and buy 3 quarts of barley, which was a cheaper, less expensive, less nutritious food. So you could get enough to feed 3 people with all that you make. But the point here is it's going to take everything that you make at this time in the future just to get enough to barely survive and to eat with nothing left over. And we've seen examples of this kind of hyper skyrocketing inflation in the past. Back in Weimar, Germany, that was really a setup for World War II. Some of you may know this, but back in Zimbabwe in 2008, their inflation month to month was 79.6 billion% month to month. On the year, it was 89.7 sextrillion inflation over the year. Now that is skyrocketing hyperinflation, but that's what the Bible says is coming. So there is an economic Armageddon that's coming to the global economy of this world. But then it says at the very end there of the passage, and do not harm the oil and the wine. These were the foods or the products that were more enjoyed by the wealthy. And so I think what it's saying here in this passage, that it's saying that the divide or the chasm between the rich and the poor will increase during that period of time. Now, eventually, if you go on and read to the end of Revelation chapter 6, the wealthy are going to get their share of disaster eventually that comes as well. But I think when we read a passage like this and the hyperinflation the Bible predicts during the end times, we can see today the setup for this is countries are just getting more and more and more in debt. Productivity in many countries seems to be decreasing. There just seems to be kind of a global malaise in the economies of the world. So we see that what's happening today certainly foreshadows what the Bible predicts. Now, we don't know when the rapture is going to happen. We don't know when the tribulation is going to begin and these things are going to take place. But what we see today certainly seems to be setting the stage for what the Bible predicts in the future. Well, I hope that's helpful to understand the third horseman of the apocalypse and kind of how that fits in with what we might be seeing today. God bless you, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.